How's that for an intro? Welcome to the rebooted Who Wore It Better, where I review NXT and AEW Dynamite from separate nights and try and figure out which show won for the week. Now, we all know the Wednesday Night War is over with NXT moving to Tuesdays, but let's be honest, some of you will still compare one show over the other, and that's why this show is here. But please understand, this is not meant to rile up either fan base because it's all meant to be done in good fun. I really enjoy watching both shows, and I'm going to have a better time, I feel, watching them on two separate nights now instead of one. I like both these shows a lot more than, say, Raw and SmackDown, which is why I kept these two shows on the rotation. So let's dive in, let's have some fun, and as always, like what you like, don't be a dick. NXT begins with KARRION KROSS, the new NXT champion as it was meant to be. All is right with the world, and now we can forget that shoulder injury ever happened, and the KARRION KROSS era can begin anew. We get some "You Deserve It" chants from the live crowd. I did not miss those during the pandemic. So anyway, Kross says, he puts over Balor for his efforts in the match at TakeOver, and he's willing to fight anybody for his championship. He says, "You step up and I'll kick your heads off one by one," basically. And then he and Scarlett stare longingly and creepily into each other's eyes. This is one of many things we see on this week's NXT, which is just kind of fallout from TakeOver. With this episode, there's not a whole lot of big story progression because they just came off TakeOver, so it's kind of a period where we establish what happened and start planting some seeds for the next angles, but nothing huge is really happening on this night. We get the recap for Stand and Deliver when up next, MSK defend their newly won NXT tag titles against KILLIAN Dane and Drake Maverick. Kind of a scary moment early on in which they mess up a leapfrog on Maverick. Drake gets his shit wrecked for a lot of this match here. He takes the brunt of this match. One of my favorite parts of this thing actually is when KILLIAN and Drake begin a comeback and Drake volunteers to let KILLIAN powerbomb him onto, I believe it was Nash Carter, but Wesley pulls him away when he's already mid-move, so KILLIAN just ends up powerbombing his own partner for no reason. Drake takes even more bumps until MSK ultimately retain and get booed by the live crowd, which totally shocked me. I was under the impression these guys were perennial baby faces, but apparently the crowd was way more pro-Drake on this evening. After the match, though, you see Alexander Wolf from Imperium enter the ring, stare down KILLIAN, and then suddenly Eichner and Bartel jump Dane and beat him down. Wolf has picked his side. He stands over KILLIAN's head, and they do the pose and everything, and we hear one person in the crowd go, "I love you, Imperium! I love you!" So seems to be the new angle here, where continuing this relationship between, Dane and Wolf, and that causes more friction, and now it seems that Imperium have some new targets. Well, Robert Stone recently bought himself some very expensive, fancy, sparkly gloves, but in doing so appears to have shortchanged one of his own clients, Mercedes Martinez, some money. So this week backstage, we see Martinez violently confront Stone and Aaliyah, throttling Aaliyah against the wall when Jessie Kamea shows up and just kind of calmly separates the two, and Mercedes, instead of just attacking her, instead just kind of calms down and they exchange some words. So we'll be having a match with these two later. And then we get a recap, a full breakdown of the unsanctioned match between Cole and O'Reilly at the end of TakeOver last week. And we see some follow-up footage where Cole is now in a neck brace and is stretchered off. Kyle O'Reilly collapses when he passes through the curtain. They're both put in ambulances and driven to the same hospital, and they're just being wheeled into the hospital together. And this is an amazing shot where Cole is still strapped in with his neck brace and everything, just screaming at Kyle, "I'll fucking kill you, Kyle! You're dead! That was bullshit!" Just yelling and ranting and raving like a madman, while Kyle just sits there stoically, just taking it all in. And it was pretty hilarious to see that follow-up. They're going to fight till the end here. We go to that match now between Martinez and Kamea. Jessie starts out strong, jumping Mercedes from the get-go, pulling her hair and beating her up for a bit. Goes for a dive, but she misses, and Mercedes ends up beating her with a quickness. Afterwards, she chases Robert Stone around the ring and throttles him until he finally produces a stack of money from his blazer and hands it to her, so that debt's been paid. And then Martinez goes over to the announce desk and yells at Vic Joseph she wants a shot against Raquel Gonzalez in that title very soon. So kind of a nice rebound for Martinez here, wins very decisively, seems to have distanced herself now from the Robert Stone brand, this would appear, and now she seems to be going on her own and might be Raquel's next challenger, but we'll see. The Way are interviewed about their 8-person tag team match later. Johnny Gargano reiterates that William Regal is cuckoo bananas. Austin Theory says he's going to take out Dexter Lumis, and Indy Hartwell chimes in saying she hopes to take out Dexter Lumis for sex. Then we see Isaiah Swerve Scott in his studio once again, cutting a promo on Leon Ruff. He puts over his performance of the Gauntlet Eliminator on at TakeOver and says, he's sick of having to deal with Leon Ruff. And after this match they have later tonight, there will be no more interaction between the two of them. It's going to be done after this. The undisputed Cruiserweight champion Santos Escobar makes his way to the ring. He talks about how 1 year ago this championship belonged to a forgotten division and now it's main event caliber. And so he issues an open challenge for the belt, but before he can even finish the sentence, Kushida's music plays and we have ourselves a title match. Kushida with some nods to the new Hall of Famer Jushin Liger with his signature taunt and a Shote palm strike near the end. Some great wrestling in this match, by the way. It ends with like kind of a back and forth of roll-up counters and everything. Finally, Kushida wins that exchange, pins Santos to win and become the new Cruiserweight champion. How crazy is that, just like days after TakeOver in the brutal ladder match in which Santos won and unified the two Cruiserweight belts? For him to lose it so soon is a real big shocker, but in a good way, because Santos has done pretty much all he can with the belt. Kushida with the championship, to me, is a long time coming, and what a fun match this was to get there. Tommaso Ciampa and Timothy Thatcher back together again. They say how they may not have won every fight they've had together, but they have passed every test, and they finish what they start. Ciampa wraps it up by saying that they're going to go for MSK in the tag belts. Should be a very interesting clash of styles when that match ever inevitably happens. And then elsewhere, we see General Manager Regal congratulate Kushida on the title win. Jordan Devlin, the former Cruiserweight champion, shows up and says, Santos Escobar just climbed a ladder. He didn't beat me for the championship. So he says when he gets back to America from Ireland, he wants a shot at the championship, and the new champ seems pretty cool with that. Again, should be a great one when it inevitably happens. Dakota Kai introduces the new NXT Women's Champion, Raquel Gonzalez, and she makes a very passionate speech, talks about how a year and a half ago when NXT debuted on the USA Network, she was not ready for that debut, and so that was her motivation to work harder and to get better, and so that's why she debuted at TakeOver Portland, and the stuff she and Dakota have done together, and now it's all led up to this moment here where she's champion. Then out comes Frankie Monet. Yes, the former Taya Valkyrie is making her NXT debut, interrupting the new champion, and she's got her dog with her too. So she introduces herself to Raquel, and Raquel basically says, if you interrupt me again, I'll shove that dog up your ass. So then Monet just leaves. That was her big debut. And then suddenly we see Rhea Ripley, the new Raw Women's Champion, interrupt, and she shows up and stares down Raquel for a minute, but they're just friends. They hug it out. Like, ooh, we're champions now. It's nice. Then suddenly Bianca Belair shows up, the new SmackDown Women's Champion. So these three products of NXT who have all recently kind of made good on their own. We see this picture in the background of them from a couple of years ago early on, and so it's them standing there now, and they hold their belts up, and it's all very nice. And then Dakota Kai just stands there awkward as hell while these champions are celebrating. This whole segment, this was like trying to fit two segments in a one segment bag, because you had, Raquel celebrating, you had Frankie Monet coming in, and if that were literally it would have been fine. Or if you took out Frankie Monet and you just had Raquel celebrating, then the champions come out, that would have been better. But I still think this whole moment of the three of them just kind of standing there and smiling and holding the belts and everything with a picture in the background seemed kind of forced and kind of hokey. Like we see later on online, they took like professional pictures in the back, and I think that would have been just fine to do that. I get the significance of it, these three NXT products, and they're all kind of there. They all won their belts around the same time. So it's kind of like a big redemption story or a bit of a validation, and I get that, but I think there was way too much information crammed in here. And I think Frankie Monet's debut was like, okay, that was kind of interesting, but then it got kind of buried. They buried the lead with this thing with the champions. And so, yeah, it would have been better if they kept these two segments separate, in my opinion. Pete Dunne cuts a promo about how he should be the next one to challenge for the Cruiserweight Championship since he beat Kushida at TakeOver. Good point, Pete. And then we get a hype package heralding the coming arrival of Sorey, the new signee from Japan. Back live, William Regal goes into his office and he sees Roderick Strong and Marina Shafir waiting for him. Roderick reluctantly hands his resignation papers to Regal. He seems to be done with NXT entirely. Kind of a shocking development here, but Regal shakes his hand and says, "You're welcome back anytime." "Oh, he'll be back, William." I think he'll be back. Leon Ruff takes on Isaiah Swerve Scott in a grudge match here. I really like the story in this one. Not only was there great athleticism and whatnot, but also good storytelling with Scott just kind of like rubbing it in to Ruff and just kind of talking trash as he's like getting right in his face until Ruff can really stands no more. But ultimately Scott comes back and wins with a half Nelson into like a flipping front slam, a move that I know from my California days as the Internet Mark, performed by Big Ugly JD Bishop, for a Swerve to win. Good match. Zoe Stark is interviewed backstage backstage where she says that her next goal is the ultimate goal when suddenly Mercedes Martinez jumps in and says, nobody cares about a rookie, and then Zoe takes offense to that, so I guess we'll be having a match with these two at some point in the future. Then we get a Walter promo where he talks about how he's still the NXT UK champion, Imperium will grow, the mat is still sacred, and then we see Swerve getting interviewed about his match with Leon Ruff, but Ruff jumps him immediately backstage, just beats him up and says this is not over yet. So what will the breaking point be? I mean, these guys have wrestled so much at this point. What's the blow-off ultimately going to be if this match was not it? I'm curious to know where this is going to go. In your main event, an 8-person intergender tag match, you've got Bronson Reed, Dexter Lumis, and the tag team champions, Shotzi and Ember, taking on the Way collectively here. This is a really fun match, honestly. There's a lot of different stories going on, a lot of wild different characters in this match as well. At one point, Candice tries to attack Bronson, but she just is deflected off of his chest, but she does hit a cool DDT to the outside onto Dexter Lumis at one point. There's a bit of a lack of enforcement of the rules here, where the whole men can only wrestle the men and the women can only wrestle the women. Yeah, that's thrown out pretty early on in this thing, because you get a lot of intergender action here, mostly from the heels trying and failing, where then you get the females on the babyface side trying and attacking and succeeding, guys like Theory and Gargano and stuff. There's a great moment where Indy Hartwell kind of pulls a Sherry Martel in SummerSlam 92, and she makes herself kind of passes out, and she wants Dexter Lumis to carry her off in his waiting arms, and when he finally does it, Indy looks back to the camera, gives a big wink and a thumbs up, which I thought was pretty hilarious. In the end, Theory gets beaten up a lot by the ladies, which again seems to fly in the face of the rules here, but he's flattened with the tsunami by Bronson Reed for the good guys to win. I thought it was a really fun, entertaining main event match, and I think it's the perfect time to have a match like this too, because like I said, we are just coming off a takeover, and we got to give some time to ramp up the seriousness for the next one, so it seems like a good palate cleanser, this match here. Again, if you're a stickler for the rules for an intergender mixed match kind of matches and everything, mixed tags, not the match for you, because there's a lot of violation of those mixed match kind of rules and everything. But if you look past that, there's a lot of fun character work here that I really enjoyed. Dynamite this week begins with a package from the Young Bucks explaining why they've done what they've done. Why did they rejoin the Elite with Kenny Omega and sell their souls to the devil himself, Don Callis? They explain how, Don was right, because the Young Bucks have changed. They'd gotten complacent over the last couple of years in favor of the big paycheck, but now Matt tells Nick it's time to finally show the world some of the old Young Bucks again. Then after the intro, we see Mike Tyson backstage talking about his involvement in the Special Enforcer for tonight's match with Chris Jericho and Dax Harwood, and then MJF appears and tells him, I'm not telling you to cheat in this match, I'm just telling you to be on the right side of history. So he offers Tyson a blank check, and then Tyson just tears it up and chews it up and spits it out in MJF's face, so he cannot be bought here. Probably the most entertaining Tyson's been in his entire run on AEW so far. In our first match of the evening, the Young Bucks defend the tag team titles against Death Triangle, that's Phoenix and Pac, and you can tell the Bucks are definitely heels now, because not only are they doing more back rakes than usual, they're also wearing custom Dior and Nikes, and there's a great chant from the fans, those are fake, as the match is going on. Don Callis is on commentary here. There's a great line that I popped for where Excalibur asks him, what do you think about SCU and how they feel about the Young Bucks? They're friends and everything. And Don goes, we're trying to limit the number of friends the Young Bucks can hang out with. They're kind of like wood ticks. That was a great line here. So if you want to see some good lucha things and you want to see a glimpse of the old heel Young Bucks of old, this is a really great match for that. Pay-per-view quality match here, because both teams really bring it. It's very entertaining. And in the end, though, you've got this moment where the Bucks rip off Phoenix's mask and they hit him with a double super kick while he's distracted for the Young Bucks to win and retain. This is a great opener and easily the best match of the night. And then at the very end, Excalibur invokes the spirit of Shivani by saying, Young Bucks, you can go straight to hell. It's not quite the same impact, honestly. Backstage, Alex Marvez interviewing Hangman Page, who's hanging out with the Dark Order, and he's asked what he thinks about what's going on right now with Kenny Omega and the Young Bucks at the moment, and Page changes the subject and says, I'm going to get some egg rolls. Who wants some? Then he goes to leave. And by the way, John Silver is also an unsung hero in this bit too. Very funny. Then after the break, the Inner Circle hanging out with Mike Tyson, and Chris Jericho explains that ever since they got beat up by Pinnacle last month, it forced them to kind of recheck their priorities and everything and make amends to the people they've done wrong. Again, classic kind of babyface rehabilitation promos here. So he says the first person he called was Mike Tyson to bury the hatchet, and he tells Mike to still call it down the middle as the Special Enforcer later on, and Tyson reiterates reiterates that he'll be firm but fair. I thought this was a pretty good explanation. Like, I was really hating the stuff originally, like last year with Tyson and Jericho, the brawl that went nowhere, and I just absolutely hated it. Wasn't a fan of Tyson just kind of coming back like with very little like, oh, well, what's he there for? Who really knows? Last week. But at least now there seems to be an explanation for it, and I'm tolerant of it. I usually don't like celebrity involvement unless the celebrity can really bring it and really carry their end of the deal here and carry their weight. Tyson right now, good energy tonight so far, but we'll see how the night progresses. Red Velvet versus Jade Cargill up next. Red Velvet looking very impressive at the start, but Cargill's very powerful. She follow-away slams Red Velvet into the first couple of the rows in the crowd. Velvet makes a comeback, but Jade stops her with JADE, which is her version of the Glam Slam, to win. So very impressive look from Jade here. And again, I kind of echo the sentiment of a lot of people here saying that Jade Cargill has tremendous upside. Very good showing for her. For someone with as little experience as she does, she has a great TV presence about her. So really looking forward to seeing where Cargill will fit along the other ladies of AEW and wrestling in general in the next year from now. Backstage with Dr. Britt Baker and Rebel, Britt talks about how with Red Velvet losing her match, that means she should easily leapfrog her in the very respected and very important AEW women's rankings. And then she says, she's going to work hard. Very, very facetious kind of promo here where she says she's going to work really hard and climb up those rankings the old-fashioned way by winning matches, beginning with Dark Elevation. Elsewhere, we see Anthony OGOGO making his in-ring debut as part of the Factory against Cole Carter. The Factory appears to be the name of QT Marshall's splinter group from the Nightmare family and whatnot. So the match ends as quickly as it begins, because within seconds, OGOGO hits like a low body shot to Carter and just lays him out, and the referee calls the match. Very interesting open and shut case here for OGOGO's debut, short and sweet, and they really seem to plug on commentary how he's going to be kind of like the centerpiece of the Factory, which I think is very interesting for someone who probably has like the least experience out of everyone else in the group right now. For them to kind of hitch their wagon to him is very interesting. I'm really curious to see what Solo and Camarado will do later on as well. But yeah, interesting look for OGOGO here, and if they really want to push him as the star of the group, hopefully they'll have some longer matches to prove it. We get a promo from Miro where he says he's breaking off from Kip Sabian to go his own way and pursue championship gold, so look out all you belt holders, it's the right call. I think there's not much more blood you can get from that stone of Miro and Kip Sabian together. I questioned that partnership kind of from the beginning. So now after Arcade Anarchy, there's really nowhere for this tandem to go. So Miro being on his own, finally in AEW, I think is the absolute right call. And hopefully they can kind of right that ship with him and make him look like the beast he really should be, again, on his own. And then it's time for Chris Jericho versus Dax Harwood. You got Sammy Guevara and Cash Wheeler in the corners respectively. All the other Inner Circle and Pinnacle members are barred from ringside. Mike Tyson is the special guest enforcer here. Tyson is fairly impartial early on. He rips weapons out of both guys' hands in the first minute or so. And it's a big fight, and then a wrestling match breaks out in here. Really good back and forth here, and a really just solid basic match here between the two of them. Jericho at one point even does a top cross body from the top rope. We don't see that very often in his matches these days, and ultimately just chaos breaks out because Pinnacle shows up, Inner Circle shows up to even the odds. There's so many bodies flying everywhere at this point, and that Cash grabs the baseball bat and looks to do some damage, but Tyson catches him and pops him right in the mush. Looks absolutely devastating. Jericho hits Dax with the Judas effect to win the match here, and then afterward Jericho announces that Tyson is an ancillary member of the Inner Circle, so maybe it's kind of like the Hornswoggle and Great Khali and Boogeyman to DX back in the day. But yeah, I thought it was actually a really good match and great babyface work by Jericho here. And yeah, the madness on the outside was a bit distracting by the end, but then in the end, everything kind of worked out the way it was supposed to. Tyson served his role. Again, how much more we're going to milk from Tyson being part of the Inner Circle? Who really knows? I mean, he's the ancillary member, which means like he's a babyface when he comes back. If he comes back, who knows what the plan for Tyson is now. But in this very short arc, I would say they've used Tyson pretty effectively for someone who really can't wrestle. Outside the arena, the Elite are interviewed. Many of them take turns kind of cutting promos and everything. Callis says that the Young Bucks joining last week wasn't the end of their story, it was the beginning. Omega says, they've never tried to be like everyone else, and that's why people hate us, and we're just going to keep winning gold along the way. And the Young Bucks talk about how they're the best tag team in the world and whatnot. And Callis says there's more surprises coming for the Elite. He kicks the cameraman down, and they all cheer and celebrate that. Then we get a promo from Thunder Rosa, where she's in the top 5 of the women's rankings now, and she wants the gold sucker, whether it's the AEW women's title or the NWA women's title. She calls out a lot of different people here, so she's going to take over the world. Then KRIS Statlander makes her in-ring return for the first time since her injury against Amber Nova. Pretty academic squash match here. Statlander gets pretty much all the offense here, ends up winning with the Big Bang Theory, and then she hugs it out with her new friends, the best friends. And yeah, happy to see KRIS back. I think she was, her presence was sorely lacking. She was very much missed in the women's division for a long time with her injury, because she was one of the few who was really kind of TV ready and was like, had a good character and was over. And then she got hurt, and then the rest of the division kind of fell apart in her wake. But now that she's back, and now the women's division seems to be kind of rebuilding and everything, or is rebuilt, I'm really excited to see where these matches can take us. Team Taz are backstage plotting how they're going to handle this recruitment of Christian thing. So Taz telling Brian Cage and Ricky Starks to stay in the back. And then we see Tony Schiavone interviewing Cage in the ring. Who's going to accept this open challenge? We see Taz and Hook and Hobbs make their way to the ring and say, what's the deal? You've not answered my call after my request, my offer for you to join the team 1 week ago. And Christian says, I didn't come to AEW to help solve your problems. I came here to win championships. He makes a short joke at Taz's expense and says the answer is no. And Taz's comeback is, well, if I stand on my wall, it'll be 10 feet above you, which is actually a pretty good comeback. So then Will Hobbs kind of steps forward and fights Christian Cage. He beats Cage down for a long time and just lays him laying there. And that's how the segment ends. We find out these two will be having a match next week. Pretty good segment here. And again, it kind of further builds the friction between Team Taz with Ricky Starks and with Brian Cage. And Hobbs showing his dominance here for the first time in a while on Dynamite, it feels like. Dark, he's doing well, but now is a chance for him to really shine on Dynamite next week against someone like Christian. I'm looking forward to that. There's a high package for the Hikaru Shida Tai Conti match for next week. Then our main event, it's a Falls Count Anywhere match for the TNT title as Matt Hardy challenges Darby Allin. By the way, my condolences to the Hardy family at this time, the loss of Matt and Jeff's father. I actually read tonight that this match was filmed before Matt and Jeff's father passed away, so that explains why he's here at this point. So anyway, the match begins with Hardy just beating the hell out of Allin with a steel chair. Darby finally mounts a comeback, but as soon as he does, here comes the rest of the Hardy family office, but then here comes the Dark Order and Sting to help even the odds. Like, Sting spends the next several minutes just slowly beating the hell out of Private Party on the outside while there's this whole match going on with Matt and Darby. It's great stuff. And then we get Ethan Page and Scorpio Sky about to jump Sting, but then Lance Archer shows up and cuts them off, and he beats up Private Party in front of Sting, kind of show like they're still on the same side, kinda, but kind of giving kind of a knowing look as Archer leaves. Then Sting hands the bat to Darby Allin, and then he leaves. Darby and Matt fight their way through the backstage area, big diving leg drop onto the table through to Darby, and then back on the outside they're fighting, and then Darby ends up beating up Matt with a baseball bat, putting him on the announce table, then doing a giant coffin drop off one of those steel trusses as the set through the table onto Hardy. Great aim, by the way. It could have easily gone wrong, but Darby hits it and he wins and retains. This is a wild match too, very similar vein to the craziness we saw in the earlier match with the Inner Circle and Pinnacle all fighting. Here we see the HFO and the Dark Order fighting as well. Just more of the same here. So I guess there's a bit of symmetry in that, or some similarities and stuff. But yeah, wild main event, very fun, and a crazy finish. Time now for me to decide which show won for the week, NXT or AEW Dynamite. And let me just say off the bat, it is a hell of a lot more fun to watch both of these shows on separate nights than trying to watch both of them in one night. I think that both shows can breathe and stand on their own merits. They're easier to follow. There's more fun to enjoy. I think NXT moving to Tuesdays is going to be a great thing for both products, not just from like a ratings perspective, just from a fan enjoyability perspective. That being said, I gotta pick a winner for this one, and I'm going with Dynamite. I think simply by virtue of NXT kind of in that recovery mode after TakeOver, not a lot of big story progression. Still, there's some good character work that we saw on that show, but for my money, AEW was a stronger show because you had bigger matches, you had bigger character development, more interesting things going on. Yeah, and I have to say I was pleasantly surprised with the Mike Tyson involvement. All told, not really a lot of weaknesses across either show, and the things that I didn't like about them weren't huge deals, but ultimately I got to give them out to AEW this week. But what did you think of NXT and AEW this week, folks? What do you think of the two-night structure as opposed to the two-in-one night of the olden days? Let me know in the comments section below. I'm Brian Zane, and I'll see you next time.